podcast, Harsh Tiwari from CUNA Mutual Group talks about fabric of a data science leader in financial world. So stay tuned. Welcome everyone to another episode of Future of Data podcast. Today we have an interesting guest, Harsh Tiwari, and a brief bio. So Harsh is Senior VP and Chief Data Officer at CUNA Mutual Group in Madison, Wisconsin. His primary responsibilities include leading enterprise-wide data initiatives, providing strategy and policy guidance for data acquisitions, usage, and management. He joined the company in July 2015. Before joining CUNA, Harsh spent many years working in information technology, analytics, and data intelligence. He worked at Capital One Financial Group in Plano, Texas for 17 years, where he most recently focused on creating an effective data and business intelligence environment to manage risks across the company as the head of risk management data and business intelligence. He has also served as a divisional CIO for small business credit card and consumer lending, head of portfolio and delivery management, head of auto financial and data business intelligence, business information officer of Capital One Canada, and analyst, senior manager of small business data and system analysis. A native of India, Harsh earned a BS in mechanical engineering from Mysore and an MBA of financial and MIS from Drexel University in Philadelphia. In his spare time, Harsh enjoys golfing and spending time with his wife Rashmi and this son who is 12 and a daughter who is 8. With that, Harsh, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Vishal, for having me. Really excited about talking to you and all of your viewers. Like you said, I think, I've spent a decent amount of time data. And trust me, on a school of hard knocks, you learn a lot of stuff. So I'm excited in sharing what I can.
Beautiful. So I think fabulous background. I think finance has been one of the early adopter of all the data capabilities that has been brewing, and they have been sort of, because of regulation and because of the amount of transactional data and data that they handle, one of the fantastic area to be a data scientist and data officer in. So why don't you walk our viewers and listeners through your journey to what bring you here and what's your background and what bring you to CUNA and your past?
Sure. So I'll start, at the beginning when I joined Capital One. Way back in May of 1998, Capital One hired me as amongst their first data analysts. And real story, I walk in day one into my work and my manager says, you know what, you passed all of the process and we have hired you as a data analyst, but I don't know what the hell a data analyst does. And I'm talking about 1998 when the role data analyst really did not even exist. So I got really lucky, Vishal, in my career in terms of defining, what is this thing called data analysis? Why should you have it? What do they do? How do they do it? Very early on in my life, as I was starting to look at the behavioral data, again, I was really lucky because there was no defined kind of path for this is what a data analyst does. So, I could essentially go look at several things. And among the first things I looked at was this behavioral data. And what I figured out was, despite your best upfront decisioning, everybody uses FICO. We used to use FICO for deciding. But within 30 and 60 days, the transactional data allowed me to split risk by an incremental factor of 10.
Wow.
That's fantastic because in the lending business, losses and credit risk management is king. And so with that insight, we essentially developed this whole series of strategies called BBAM, behavior-based account management, that essentially led for small business, turned that portfolio around from losing about $10 million to making 25, but applied to the broader US card portfolio led to almost $1 billion in extra income. And that power, seeing just what data can do for you, essentially set me down the path that said, how do you make it structural for the company to do this? I had stumbled on it almost by accident. I was lucky. And what I then have spent my career, whether it was CIO for Canada or the CDO for auto finance, CIO for our consumer businesses, risk management, and then obviously at CUNA Mutual is to essentially structurally develop infrastructure, people, systems, such that you can get to the data, get to the insights, and then most importantly, in my opinion, implement the insights into a strategy that allows people to see the bottom line impact.
Hmm.
That, in a nutshell, is how I would classify my journey.
Interesting. Wow. Wow. Fascinating. So, couldn't have said any better, I think. And thank you so much for walking us through that. So, tell us about your current role. Like, what is a chief data officer at a company like CUNA Mutual Group looks like? What is exactly that? We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Sure. So generically, I think over 3 to 5 years, companies have realized just how powerful this thing called data can be. Everything from the Amazons of the world to the Quicken loans, people that have leveraged data have very quickly established beachhead positions that have become unassailable. I can obviously have named Amazon, I can name Capital One, my own employer. Fundamentally, what happened across the industry is this realization that you have mounds of data sitting. Now, in general, historically, as the data warehousing revolution grew, people have leveraged the value proposition that are sitting in silos. So, finance typically understands everything from financial reporting and the financial data. Marketing people, generally saw the value out of their marketing and sales data. What I think the smarter guys realized is when you break down these silos and you start integrating these, there is a lot more value to be deployed. And that's where I think people started toying with this idea of CDO to say, how do we get all of our data assets together and how do we really unleash the power of data? And that, I think, in a nutshell, is what a lot of CDOs are in the business of, is figuring out how to take all the data that exists probably in silos, meld it all together, and allow that sort of democratization. All of these topics, none of them is new, but what I think has happened is as the technology keeps on advancing, as tools keeps on coming, as big data and cloud infrastructure became available, the marginal cost of doing business with data keeps on massively declining. Like it's that classic, technological curve. And so the possibilities keep on opening up and becoming bigger and bigger. And in comes the CDO role. Now, I'll tell you, across the industry, there's still confusion, right? People have hired CDOs. Some report into the IT world, others report into finance, yet another, report even into CTO. So there's still structural instability around just where exactly does this thing fit. There are elements that are absolutely technical. There are elements that are absolutely very business oriented because eventually you need to convert the insight into analysts. Where it will evolve, I don't know. But if I'm a betting man, I think there are pieces here that you essentially want to be central to how you even think about your corporate strategy. And that's where, in my personal opinion, it makes the most sense is to start thinking about it as a strategic asset that allows a company to distinguish itself and really knock the ball out of the park. So that's kind of partly that's what I do at Mutual, is to figure out how to leverage all the different disparate businesses, data silos that we have, and how do you bring that power to bear such that you can have overperformance versus history.
Interesting. And what is CUNA Mutual Group? If you can walk us through what is this what do you guys do?
Yeah, so fascinating. CUNA Mutual Group, is an 80-year-old company that's been generally focuses specifically on the credit union segment. About 80-90%, 95+% of the credit unions are their customers, and essentially they'll do everything that is kind of cannot be done by credit unions because they have their legal charter. But in definitely in terms of serving the members of the credit union.
Interesting. So I think you raised an pretty interesting point about the location of chief data officer, like who does they report to. What is your observation? Like what have you seen, and what do you prefer seeing when it comes to putting a context of, say, financial industries or maybe risk industries? What do you think that that the location where that is most suitable for a chief data officer to exist on?
Yeah, so I'll give you my observation and then my opinion. My observation is I think companies have started this journey in terms of putting CDO best based on where they think the value proposition is.
Hmm.
Uh, and there's a wide disbursement in that area. Some of the most technologically savvy, data savvy companies don't even have a CDO. Capital One is an example. There is no corporate CDO because the corporate belief there is everybody needs to be a smart, data sensitive, and data savvy analyst. So they have these, army like 5,000-10,000 analysts that are super users and every day explore data and their insights. Versus a majority of other companies that are just kind of starting, essentially tend to centralize CDO. Those that are more technologically focused, as in we need to centralize our IT assets, typically put that position in the IT world. Others that are more focused on, well, I need to figure out before I invest what to even do. Where is the value proposition over here? Perhaps they've been burned by all the past hype over CRM or operational risk and a whole bunch of topics. So they tend to focus more on the analytics part and tend to base a CTO more closer to an analytic role like a CAO. My personal opinion is the best place to put it is some central role that essentially solves everything from products, as in how do you sell better, how do you make sure that your consumers essentially understand the value proposition and leverage it, but also serves the internal parts of the company to say, how do you make your operations, your risk management, your actuaries, your finance, how do you make them be better, faster, cheaper, more effective with data? BI has gotten a lot of mileage in the recent world, and there is a massive value proposition over there. I'll give you a very simple example, right? We've taken almost 2 separate teams of reporting analysts, and we have automated all of their dashboards such that about 20-30 headcount has now been freed up. Now, good news is for the company that is operational cost saving, but my personal guidance to the company is instead of thinking about that, why don't we reinvest that in driving innovation and incremental learning, right? So a lot of people think about data sometimes and analytics typically in that, classic describe the elephant problem. There is a trunk, there are 4 trees, there's a tail, but the whole elephant is really anything and everything. It's one of the best fields, as in you can play in any of these vectors that you wanted to, optimizing sales, optimizing processes, optimizing risk, optimizing, financial reporting, so on and so forth. But not a single one of them essentially covers what is the wide variety of data. It's a target-rich field, which makes it both exciting, but paradoxically very risky, because you also need to focus on kind of where exactly your corporate culture is, what is the most acceptable, so you can get to that value proposition and sustainable investment quickly. That, I think, is something that a lot of CDOs struggle, a lot of companies actually struggle, which is where kind of the CDO placement also starts varying significantly.
Interesting. No, I think so. You raised a very interesting point, and I remember I was having this conversation with a couple of months back with one of the oil and gas executive about the location of a CDO, and I think my rant to that executive was, hey, you know what? Businesses look at this position as more of a transactional role, and I think you pointed out pretty nicely that value defined the CDO role today that you are observing. But what you wanted to see is more of a relational, like more of a thinking 10 step ahead, thinking about the future, and then strategically allocating the CDOs or CAOs, however you want to look at them, and then empower them with sort of right structure, right architecture, and sort of right strategy that they can execute for the future growth. And I think it was fascinating that this gentleman was saying that the pressure that he gets about hiring a CDO for his current need is so high that it's very difficult for him to sort of think a 10 step ahead, and thinking it in a very clean way. Where should I locate this office that ultimately, eventually, will also start becoming one of the center of excellence sort of office for us. So, do you have any thought on that? We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, sure. To me, it is, both the biggest exciting part of the role and arguably the hardest one to achieve, in that it's very easy to intuitively understand that data has value and you should be able to deploy that value. And typically where that value comes from is either increase the revenue or decrease the cost, right? That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum that, I've actually talked to my peers and said, to say that any one person can essentially change that equation radically and suddenly get you from, 1% growth to 20%, that's just, smoking funny weed. I don't know that any one person can do it. So what I think, in my opinion, an ideal CDO role and its placement and is really more about changing the culture. And when I say changing the culture, what it means is democratizing decision making. So you have data, but really the data and the insights contained in any one small sphere don't help. What helps is making it, distributing it to the point where it can be acted upon. If, I really in my role don't talk to customers. It's the frontline people that do. Enabling them to see what would be the next best sales opportunity, enabling them to see what the history of the calls is so they can better predict, enabling them to see the next set of actions that we are able to mine from a data is where the power of data is. But to make that happen, right, comes everything from collecting the data, developing the insights, deploying the insights at the right time to the frontline associate who then has to take. Now, in that chain, there's a series of topics that need to be solved for everything from infrastructure and IT. How do you take the data? How do you assemble the insight? And then how do you deliver that insight at the real-time basis? Which is why, sometimes when people talk about digital and people talk about data and people talk about analytics and machine learning, I think of all of those as a continuum. Your input is data. Every time somebody interacts with you, your customer, your suppliers, they are telling you important pieces of information. Looking at them, analyzing them, synthesizing them into a set of actions that then go out to the front line such that the next interaction is better for them because you already have known, you've deployed that insight, you've learned from their previous experience, so they don't have to repeat it, and you essentially move on to the next step. Getting all of that right includes everything from, the data, the analysis, and then hence last mile is the digitized service that allows people to self-service, that allows people to interact much more effectively. That's how you save your ops cost. That's how you improve your risk profile. That's how you get better customer interactions. So to me, all of these are a continuum, and unless you think about and solve for them, looking at them in silos, essentially all it is doing is cutting the old silos, which was, a finance data warehouse, a customer data warehouse, and essentially building now a new set of silos to say, This is digital, this is data, that is analytics. But until you connect the system, you're not really getting the end point, which is the value proposition.
And that's, I think, beautifully put, Harsh. I think I thank you so much for sharing that. And when you were saying that, I think one thing that comes to my mind is, so I was looking at, when I was looking at your profile, right? So look in your bio, during Capital One days, like almost every position that you hold has an element of data in it, right? So that's, so Capital One is very sort of very good at managing data, or they're very good at sort of the central key of everyone should be aligned with data, right? But when you look at, say, other banks, and one of my client, a West Coast bank, regional bank, very old school, but they're still a bank, right? So now, when you, from your vantage point, look, when you were with Capital One, or when you're now looking at other financial institutes, what do you think is the fabric of Capital One that has made them so successful, and in sort of in managing this data that other businesses could learn from?
So specifically to Capital One, the answer is really, really simple. The CEO, Rich Fairbanks, is just amazing visionary. It helps that he's a physicist by training, so fundamentally understands a lot of data and analytics. And right from the get-go, 1994, when the company went public for the first time, the whole value proposition was we can use data to massively price people much more effectively, rather than the typical, I'm going back into history where, it was $5,000 and 19.9% interest rate, right? That's how credit cards work. Capital One was the first company that came up and said, hey, you know what, we'll let you transfer your balances for 2.9, 3.9, 5.9%. And because we think we know and understand your risk far better, we can price you at all these different pricing points that have now become the norm. So the Capital One, given that is where it started, it just grew from there. So I'll give you a very simple example. I touched on it a little bit earlier, even in this conversation. The company believes, the bank really, really, really believes in data so much so that, and I'll give you 3 data points that kind of, prove the point, so to speak. Number one, every single analyst is expected to access their own data. So the data environment that hosted at Capital One right from the get-go, it was Oracle first, then it was Teradata, now we're moving to a cloud-based platform. But right from the get-go, every analyst understands Unix, SQL, such that they extract their own data. They're super users with the idea of creating their own tables. I have not seen a single institution that forces that requirement on every analyst. Doesn't matter whether you're a business analyst, a financial analyst, or operations analyst, credit analyst, so on and so forth, right? So they've massively democratized this notion of data and analysis across the board, and that is their essentially, modus operandi to every single business and product and things that they have done. So that's number one. Number two, when Capital One started this whole notion of digital, and they are the leading forefront of digital, started with almost 100 million plus investment in digital, saying it is strategic. We believe it is the future. Digital banking is going to disrupt. We're not going to marginally think about where the ROI and precisely what it is. It is going to be a big investment. We're going to build our infrastructure. We're going to build services off of that. And we believe the payout will be there. And to this degree, I think in the latest investment call, Rich still says, I massively believe in it. I will continue to invest. We will see returns, but I am not looking for direct correlation between a dollar invested and a $1.20 made. That's not how I think about digital banking. So those are examples of how the company grew up in this notion of data and analytics and digitization as a core principle of this is who we are. In fact, one of the most telling comments from Rich is, really, we are banking just happens to be a product. We are a technology company. Our customers interact with technology. They don't interact with us bankers. They call us, they go online, they search for us, they look at our products, they compare our products. all through technical medium. If we are not good technologically, our products will not win
Mm.
in the market space. That philosophy essentially is what distinguishes Capital One, I think, more from most any other bank. And it
Mm.
proves out, right? The bank has grown from a small monoline to now one of the top 10 banks in the United States on
Mm.
the back of that philosophy.
Interesting. So now, with that in mind, right? So if you look from your vantage point, say credit unions or the regional banks that you're looking around, how could they, like, how are they performing from that metric of being data driven and being technology driven? Like, what is their sort of gap analysis, if you can, like, from your vantage, what would you say? We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, so I think for Capital One, it is continuing to experiment and learn in the market space
Right.
because the pace of change is so rapid. What people like changes so quickly. What people want from a bank, right? Very simplistically, I think for centuries now it's been true that people, when they think about banking and putting their money, they think about a branch.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yet, if you think about it now, with e-checks being deposited, all the money being transferred digitally, what do you really need a bank for?
Hmm.
Um, Unless it's a very complicated transaction, maybe international wire transfers, which again, being an immigrant, I use it. But
Hmm.
99% of the people don't really need those international wire transfer
Hmm.
types of transactions. What
Right.
you need a bank for is really the physical presence to say, emotionally, I understand my money is somewhere secure in that branch, when
Hmm.
in reality, it is nowhere in that branch. So then now the question for strategy is, how do you create that physical security without necessarily deploying a large amount of capital in the physical presence of a branch? So that's kind of one example of how the digital banking will
Hmm.
change your thinking around what your brand strategies need to be. So I think
Hmm.
and to me, I genericize this into a broader financial world to say
Hmm.
what people want and expect out of your financial services can now be fulfilled in a variety of different ways. In our own insurance world, right? Take PNC.
Hmm.
The fact that there is a claim, historically, how would it work? You would call someone, then somebody would come, they would take pictures of all the damages on your car. In today's world, none of that needs to be true. There are IoT sensors mounted on the
Hmm.
cars that talk about driving that should capture what, and if where the incident happened, you can verify that the claim is accurate. You can ask the customer to take a picture and send it to you. Your claims can be verified. You can send it to your, partners who will fix the car. So the
Hmm.
whole transaction now saved the cost of a person going, looking at it, verifying. All of that can be transformed, and essentially on the margin, you will pay nothing for all of this information to be validated, coming to you, and the claim settled.
Hmm.
So not only is ops cost saved, but the ops cost is saved even in the back office processes in
Hmm.
terms of how long it takes you to cut. All of these are, I think, experiments that are being conducted in the marketplace today. Where I think the world is headed is, that what used to be core IT principles,
Hmm.
agile development as an example, is really becoming the core way how the businesses operate. You
Hmm.
have to be a lot more agile in the way you develop your strategy, in the way you experiment and figure out what the consumers like, and continuously learn from consumers and their evolving behaviors, because consumers are now becoming very accustomed to power in their hand.
Right.
I do not want to interact with you when you are open. I want to interact when it is more convenient to me. Why do I need to call you only between the hours of 9 to 5? My
Hmm.
accident happened offline. Why can't I just send it to you, in off hours? You deal with it. That is your problem, not my problem. As the power continues to shift more towards consumers, they want and expect that paradigm to exist everywhere. It is no longer acceptable to say, well, on Amazon, I can order anything whenever I want. But when it comes to my financial services, I have to wait till,
Hmm.
9 o'clock for the office to open and disrupt my own schedule to then talk to my financial advisor. I
Hmm.
think that is going to massively change, and it is up to the companies to adapt. Paradoxically, the other thing that will change, right? People are realizing that their data is at rest. There is a
Hmm.
lot of it being captured. So people have to become trusted by
Hmm.
them to say, I will let you have my data. That trust factor is absolutely low in the banking space, in the insurance space. And my view
Hmm.
is whoever can build that trust factor more and more is going to end up winning because they will have access to a lot more intelligence and they can leapfrog the competition massively. So it's that conundrum of both. How do you collect more? How do you analyze it more? But you do it in a way that is consumer friendly. That creepiness factor does not exist. And it is much more friendly towards, I want to help you and I will do it at your terms, not at my terms. That I think is the crux of where this whole thing, that nut that needs to be cracked, is headed.
Interesting. Again, beautifully put, Harsh. I think I do appreciate you sharing that perspective. So one thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about these sort of regional banks was, so I was having this conversation with one of the credit union executive, and he was telling me a very good story. So he said, Vishal, you know what? Every credit union is assigned to a particular, say, either company, either region, religion, whatever, right? So they already have a cultural perspective of who would be the subscriber, right? So there's always even before we start, there is a bond between a customer and the bank. So customer satisfaction is high, our number looks good, they are tolerant to our nuances, we are tolerant to their nuances, like there's a cultural sort of thing going on. So we don't have that much of motivation to pursue data, or to sort of to use data to understand our customers, because our customers are typically happy with us. What would you say to that executive?
Um, so here's my view, right? Which is, I think all of us have seen examples of those that have pursued it and
Hmm.
they've gotten to a position which is slowly getting unassailable.
Hmm.
That's kind of the first year, right? The breakouts, the Capital Ones, the Amazons, the Quicken Loans. Quicken Loans to me is a fascinating example, right?
Hmm.
If you go back, what, less than 10 years ago, they were
Hmm.
nothing in the
Hmm.
mortgage space.
Hmm.
Everybody knew it as a personal finance.
Hmm.
To now, they are the top five mortgage originators.
Hmm.
Everybody has heard and seen that whole rocket mortgage. And
Hmm.
all they've done is taken data and on the back end massively
Yeah.
optimized so you get a decision within, minutes instead of waiting for hours at your convenience. So these beachheads essentially create an artificial demand where then the second leg of people, right? Once Quicken Mortgage becomes number one, once Amazon becomes number one, and they're growing so massively, the next fast followers are quickly following them and saying, "Hey, why can't I get there?"
Hmm.
The thing that happens is, once that happens, it becomes an existential threat to the long tail of people that are living behind. It's
Hmm.
that classic change curve, right? The early adapters, then the
Hmm.
followers, but then there's a long tail. And my view is this is where you are, which is a lot of people are now thinking about it less even as an upside, but more even as a existential threat. If I don't do this, there will be someone who will, and
Hmm.
then they will run away so far ahead that I will have to play catch up. I think there is definitely that existential threat, but there is equivalently, this area is so vast that I think there's equivalent amount of cutting edge work going on where people are incrementally continuing to experiment and come up with new and different ways. So to me, it's a very dichotomous industry in that
Hmm.
you will find on that change curve people who are leading, people who are kind of on par, and people who are following. But you'll almost not find anybody who wants to ignore this problem. Whether
Hmm.
you choose to it because you don't want to do it, or
Right.
you choose to ignore it because, well, I don't even have the wherewithal. Now, people are looking at every which model, right? Clearly, there are smaller companies that can't afford a full-time CDO. They're
Hmm.
looking to leverage vendors to get there. There are clearly people who can't hire enough talent. They are leveraging vendors. There are people who are looking to, build their own kind of data analytics, digital environment, um, de novo internally. All these to me are basically just symptoms of the core problem, which is
Hmm.
you can't ignore this. So many people are doing so much interesting stuff that
Hmm.
there is this visceral threat that if I don't start, clearly I will be left behind.
Hmm.
That I think is a big motivator for the tail enders, for the people on the cutting edge side. It's just the excitement of, oh my god, what is not possible. Very simplistically, right? Um, I was reading one of the articles from Berkshire Hathaway's co-chair, um, who was talking about this notion that they can get into health insurance came from one of their board members who's also a board member for JP Morgan. And
Hmm.
essentially it was, why wouldn't we deploy the power of data and transparency in the medical business where the costs have been outpacing and it's
Hmm.
a massive, massive, massive problem to solve for. But why couldn't we? And Warren Buffett's whole view is, look, we need to
Hmm.
learn, we need
Hmm.
to do everything that allows this to become a competitive advantage versus a disadvantage that it is today. And I
Hmm.
think that comes from this notion that if Amazon, which was essentially a book retailer, can develop a cloud service that allows everybody to innovate, why shouldn't that be the value proposition that essentially cracks the nut on medical services? Now,
Hmm.
now, now you'll see in that statement, right? Look at the audacity of that statement. A
Hmm.
book retailer to cloud services solving for medical. Left to myself, I don't think I could have ever articulated that value proposition. But that's what is happening in the marketplace today. Is people are thinking about these value propositions, and any one individual perhaps can do justice to think through everything, right? So the idea is, how do you assemble these systems together that allow you to leverage it and drive superior performance in your industry, in your function? And that's where this whole notion of continuous innovation that uses, leverages all the available data becomes the king. How
Hmm.
you do it, where you choose to deploy it, at what pace you do it, changes with industry, changes with company, changes with their culture. But the fact is, you can't ignore it.
Hmm.
And that becomes the driving factor for how you think about it, at least in my opinion.
Interesting. Wow. So, I think beautifully put. I think so, and thank you, Harsh, for walking us through that. So, if I'm an executive, let's work on a hypothesis, right? So, so if I'm an executive of a bank, and I was just recruited as a CDO, what do you think would be my bunch of initial tasks that I should worry about, or my KPIs? What do you think? What should I do?
Yeah, great question. So, to me, in terms of getting started, the number one thing I think of is selecting the right use cases. Um, Data can be deployed in a whole lot of different ways, but
Hmm.
really what you want to do is figure out from your PNL where is your biggest opportunity. So typically that is, again, it's not like just because you have data and analytics, all of the historical management savviness can be tossed out of the window. So you need to look at your positioning. What is your key strength, and where are you versus industry, either not up to par or where
Hmm.
you want to distinguish yourself? And then deploy, develop deliberate use cases which allow
Hmm.
you to build your strength or close your gaps. Look, Good to Great came out decades ago. It still says, for you to be great, you have to be really, really, really off the charts on one particular thing. By the way, you cannot be great at everything, right?
Hmm.
I believe those management tenets still absolutely make sense. Understanding where you are great, where you want to be great, where you need to be great, understanding industry, understanding structure is all a part of strategy. using that as a way to then develop your use cases to say, how do I deploy data to really be great? In Capital One's example, it is all about credit risk management. The
Hmm.
bank makes a lot of lending decisions in terms of subprime, prime businesses. They need to manage their credit risk massively and they deploy data massively in that space. Great
Hmm.
for them. That's where the superior returns comes from, right? For a bank like JP Morgan Chase, or for a company like Amazon, they have their value propositions and where they want to deploy. So for each
Hmm.
company, I think it is to understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your positioning in the market space. What do your customers want? What do you want? And then using the data use cases to essentially showcase how fast can you accelerate on that development curve and really knock the ball out of the park. That's number one. Number two is, where do you think about your data assets, as in how much have you invested? Banks, because Federal Reserve and their central regulators have been a massive driver of change over there. They've
Hmm.
invested. They have a lot of data assets. Other companies, not so much. They haven't really thought about this. So where you are on that journey in terms of data assets and their ability to sync up is the other big piece. Because until you do that, until you build the right infrastructure, it's very hard for a data scientist to come in and leverage it, right? So mix of those, where you are infrastructurally and where you are strategically, I think is the greatest place to start in terms of figuring out how do you get to the next step. And then the last piece I'd say is continuously invest. This is not about a one-time thing.
Hmm.
That's it, I'm done. I hate this or I love this, right? It's about continuously experimenting as a way to change our culture to say, in the past, the definition of what was a great employee was somebody who drove a lot of earnings. That's still true. Except now in a knowledge economy, equally important is this notion of understanding what is it that people want.
Hmm.
No longer, maybe you actually lost a little bit of stuff, but if you absolutely know what your customers hate, that in of itself is the value proposition, because it avoids big mistakes. It
Hmm.
avoids the bank breaking types of things that can get you in hot waters. And that is also a part of how you want to reward your value propositions. So this notion of how do we think our workforce adds value needs to evolve. What is risk? In a knowledge-based learning, the biggest risk is not learning what your customers want and how their choices are evolving and why they choose to continue to work with you versus all the options. So I think if you look at
Hmm.
those three things and if you can take care of those three things, rest assured, before you know it, you will be massively data oriented company.
I think beautifully put. And what about, what if I'm a business? Like, what are the precursor that points me to a, maybe it's time for me to get a CDO? Like, what should I be? What would be my checklist as a business?
So as a business, I think, one, it has to be open to saying, we don't know everything, right? A lot of businesses, especially those that have been successful, they've been successful because they've figured out the formula. The
Hmm.
hardest challenge for a CDO or data organization now is to say, well, maybe there is a way to optimize, improve the formula that you haven't thought of. That takes
Hmm.
right then and there you've created that cultural conflict. So it is critical for businesses to be an equal willing partner in saying there are ways for us to improve and be
Hmm.
better, right? And that comes, as a statement, that's an easy thing to say. But with your actions to support it and to test it and to measure it on a regular basis, really is something that business partnership becomes critical.
Hmm.
Whether it is digitization, whether it is technology, whether it is data. I never forget that data is for the sake of corporate success. And if it is for the sake of, the first thing is, me as a CDO needs to partner with all of our business people to talk about not only what will we do, but how will we do it differently. Why?
Hmm.
it's very easy to build a model. The mathematics
Hmm.
behind the model is not
Hmm.
that hard.
Hmm.
It's generally existed now for decades. The key is then with those insights, with that analysis, with that model, what do you do differently? Because you can't have a model that says, I know what my top 20% customers look like.
Hmm.
And if nothing changed, then really all I've done is spend the money building that model and understanding that there's no revenue there. For the revenue to exist now, the sales people have to say, okay, then where are my other next 20 and how do I really go after them? Which also, by the way, means I absolutely ignore maybe or deprioritize the remainder bottom 40%. That's very hard as a human being to do because we want to treat our customers well. But at some point, if the customer is less potential, you have to prioritize, which means you have to support it on a regular basis. So it's that building that ecosystem where data insights essentially result in a changed operational behavior that then leads to new data, and that cycle has to complete itself. If you cut that cycle off,
Hmm.
cut off the value proposition, it doesn't matter where you cut it off.
Hmm.
Whichever way you draw the cut line, if you don't complete it, you're done for. And that to me is the key that business leaders bring to this is nurturing, helping that cycle be complete all the time.
Interesting. Wow. And so, as per you, what is the fabric of a successful chief data officer in a financial service industry? What are some of the ingredients that this particular sort of position guy should hold?
So I'll answer it in two parts. One is the technical part of the job, right?
Hmm.
Everything from making the right investments, picking the right technology, consolidating data, and building the value propositions, building the model, so on and so forth. All the technical pieces that go with data. But an equally important part of cycle is nurturing that with partnerships
Hmm.
along the organization in terms of actual deployment, measuring the value, and continuously improving. The
Hmm.
third vector I would argue is democratizing data. If
Hmm.
you keep all the intelligence limited to your data science world,
Hmm.
you've lost. Democratizing it so that lots of people look at it and lots of people think about their own innovation in their own space, such that everybody then kind of is thinking about innovation. So it's not a function of a group, a person, a set of people. That really starts kind of, changing the paradigm around. See, as a human being, I can only focus on finite number of things.
Hmm.
But 1,000 human beings can focus on a massively large number of finite things.
Hmm.
That's where your ops costs start decreasing, your revenue start increasing because the sales people focus on one, the operational people focus on one. So democratizing this data, democratizing insights, making it available to that line of scrimmage is an absolute sort of three key pieces that help, I think, sustain this and build
Hmm.
this over time.
Interesting. And I think so. Talk about finite things. I think that's another area that I'm glad we're segueing into that. So we are seeing almost every technology nowadays going through disruption, and whenever disruption happens, it happens in its S curve, right? Now you are at an interesting position who can actually have a good vantage point at many of the disruption, whether you call it blockchain, whether you call it AI, whether you call it uh, smart cloud or whatever you call it, right? How would you keep yourself sane? Like, how would you keep yourself? Because I think one of the tricky thing that I sort of talk to most of the leaders that I talked to was that as a leader, as a technology leader, you are holding a very interesting balance. So you are maintaining and preserving and protecting the culture of the company that has the secret sauce, and then you're recruiting the technology. And I think you have pointed out in some ways the same thing. It's that dichotomy of, hey, should I stuck to the old because that has been working, or how much should I open myself to the new, right? And now as a data officer, you have or you have been having sort of this first access to this disruption. How do you recruit, or how do you keep yourself sane, or how do you ensure that businesses stay relevant when they're going through disruption?
Yeah, great point. My take is, especially in the data world, I think of my team as a mix of those technically savvy people who I absolutely need for their technical benefit,
Hmm.
but I also need kind of, the business savvy people who can translate the insights into an actual actionable strategy. Maybe I'll give you an example. Long ago, when I was a part of Capital One, in the auto finance business, we had lost a lot of money going into that 2007 2008 financial tsunami time frame. The business lost close to $800-900 million at that time. And yet by 2012, we were back to making almost, $500 million.
Hmm.
And a lot of it had to do with uh, really kind of the data insights that we found on behalf of the business, right? But those insights and converting them into an actionable strategy actually require the modelers working with the salespeople, working with the operational people to provide unparalleled service to what we call the diamond dealers.
Hmm.
So we had a diamond dealer program that the genesis of it was from kind of the analytic insight that we found, and then
Hmm.
we had to create a value proposition for why the diamond dealers wanted to work with us, and then we had to service them in a way that felt, they felt that they were really getting superior service. So implementing that meant working with sales, working with and that's where to me, the start. And when I think about hiring people, it's that mix of folks who are really technically savvy can dig and figure out which algorithms, which mathematical methods to apply to solve a particular problem. That's one part of it. The
Hmm.
other part of it is to then take this input and then convert it into an actionable strategy. What should people do differently? Why? What should
Hmm.
they expect? So this notion of experimenting and having developed small experiments so that you don't say people, okay, just trust me, trust the data guy.
Hmm.
Nobody takes that big a leap of change. But how do you incrementally influence people to change your strategy over time? Measure it, consistently measure it, optimize it. So those two mixes are kind of what I think. Now, ideally, you want all of that in one person. Very
Hmm.
practically speaking, I think that is several different people that fill in the niches. So in my own team, I have people that have legacy experience with the
Hmm.
business, with
Hmm.
external hires that are specific experts in a couple of areas, and then there are these change management experts that their entire job is to say, how do we take this and then operationalize it? Who needs to do what? Why? How do we make it such that people embrace the change and focus on the upside rather than the downside? One of the things I've learned is I come in and say automation, cost saves, revenue generation, but oftentimes my audience,
Hmm.
a lot of other employees, they hear you're telling me I've been an idiot, you're telling me I will lose my job. It becomes an
Hmm.
existential threat. And I have to be savvy enough to overcome that, turn them around and talk about the future upside rather than
Hmm.
the past issues. I don't have any God given right to say I come in to critique you. I
Hmm.
have my role is to say how do I make the future far better so that your career will grow faster than what it has in the previous time.
Interesting. Wow. Um, I think thank you for walking us through that. I think that's pretty relevant. So now let's focus, and we're almost at the tail end of the conversation, Harsh. And I think thank you so much for being very really candid and helping us walk through that. So let's talk about you for a few minutes. So what has been sort of your ingredient to success so far? If we line it up, sort of your career so far, what are like 2 to 3 ingredients that has really helped you stay relevant and stay successful in your journey so far?
Um, sure. So to me, This goes back to kind of very early in my career when, as a data analyst, I think as a naive data analyst, I would say I defined my job as generating all of these reports and insights. And um, a very respected mentor of mine sat down with me. I was frustrated because I was generating all of this and never saw kind of any excitement or change happening. So I was really really frustrated. And so I sat down with this gentleman who then sort of counseled me and said, "Look, great. It was this like year thick report that had all sorts of insights in that 200-300 page document." And his simple question to me was, "So what?"
Mm.
And then, for the next 15 minutes, I probably highlighted all the so what's for him, saying, you realize this is going on and that is going on and this is going on, and based on this, you should do this. And he said, "Great. This is what people care about. What are you solving for? It is the so what. So redefine your role, right? The fact that you are doing all of this analysis and coming up with the insights is 80% of your time, and at max it should be 80% of your time. The other 20% of your time is answering so what. Now you have to go talk to people who are relevant and say, do you realize, and hence, so what should you be doing differently?" I will tell you that one conversation has been um, transformative for me, because since then I have always focused on the so what. The inputs are critical. Don't get me wrong, the inputs are critical. A lot of people, when they talk about data or digital, unfortunately focus on the inputs. I am building a lake, I am building machine learning, I have AI deployed. Great, but at the end of the day, AI deployment is a cost. So what? Because of AI deployment, what are you doing differently? And hence, how are you measuring so that you understand you have a positive return on your investment? Are you measuring it? Where are you measuring it? Why are you measuring it? Where are you optimizing? The so what conversation is just so critical. And to me, that is arguably the one biggest thing I always ask my team to think about is, so what? You've centralized all the data. So what? Who is now leveraging that to now develop different oversight? In our world, right? Actuaries have actuarial databases, finance does their own projections. But actuarial projections are generally long-term financial projections. How do you know? How do you meld them together so you have a much more defined financial trajectory for your institution? Is an absolute so what of it. How do you then identify the outer year risks and take actions to solve for it now? Those are the kind of so what's that are transformative for business. And by the way, you'll realize none of this has got anything to do with cloud, AI, BI, dark learning, so on and so forth. Those are tools of trade. You need tools of trade, but unless you understand the so what, unless you understand what you need to do, all of the tools are just that cost. You essentially never trade off your cost unless you understand the upside. And so focusing on that so what is really my biggest transformative issue in my entire journey.
Fascinating, Harsh. I think I've written it. I think I'll try to follow that too. It's beautiful. So one thing that we ask all of our guests to share is one of their favorite read that they have for our listeners and viewers. Do you have one that you could share?
Say that again. My favorite what?
Your favorite read. Any book that you like that you want to share?
My favorite read continues to be Good to Great, because to me, from a management perspective, as much as it is all about strategy and how companies do it, my view is it is equally applicable to my own self. What do I need to be great at? If I am a CDO, what do I really need to be great at? And what do I need to be just okay with? I am not the best CFO. I am not the best CMO. Their roles exist. But for me to be a great CDO, what do I really need to knock the ball on, and how do I get there? So it's an intensely personal journey, but I think that framework is just so applicable, and I've just found it
Hmm.
as a massively uplifting way to think about the strategy of me. Right?
Hmm.
As much as the corporate strategy, I believe your career is something that doesn't abstractly happen. You have to manage your career proactively. And to manage your career proactively, you have to understand who you are. You have to develop your value proposition. And every single day, you have to make sure you work with your environment so that they will help you grow and develop.
Hmm.
That is that's my absolute best read to this date that I leverage a lot.
Awesome. So, Harsh, with that, thank you so much. I think this is fascinating conversation and remarkably great. Thank you for being super candid. And I think one thing that I definitely want to add to what I think in my experience, one of the fabric that I have seen many of the great leaders in data science space they have is the ability to partner, or the willingness to partner, the willingness to sort of collaborate and sort of create these councils that can educate them about this, whether you call it technology, whether you call it leadership, whether you call it strategy. I think your voice has, I think that's one of the takeaway that I would feel that our listeners could should take away from this is that you should be really really open to partnering. And I think I've listened about, I think, 17 examples in your pitch emphasizing the importance of, hey, partner, create this council, talk to them, get people to things for you. I think, and I do appreciate uh, you for sharing that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I think my simple mental model in that is, as a data person, my inputs all come from technology. My
Hey.
outputs all go to business. So unless I can understand my inputs and I can create the right outputs, the processing has no value. So that's where the notion of partnership to me absolutely comes. That's my mental model.
I think so. Thank you so much, Harsh. And with that, do you have any parting thought for our listeners and viewers?
So
I'm so
all I want
sorry.
to say is, we've kind of barely scratched the surface on what is possible. And so to me, the fact that we barely scratch the surface automatically implies that we need to continuously learn, experiment, and focus on the so what, such
Hmm.
that the companies that we work for, the roles that we are in, they see the benefit. And as a derived benefit, our own careers grow. That to me
Hmm.
is just the absolutely most exciting part about data and its journey.
Thank you so much, Harsh. I think your so what is beautiful. I think very few times I have heard like very clear and very clean sort of hack that a leader could do to sort of to unravel a lot of mysteries. And I think that's one of those. So with that, Harsh, you're always welcome back on the podcast. Wish you nothing but success in your journey. And whenever you're in Boston, let's meet over a coffee or a bar. And thank you so much with that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vishal. Looking forward to it.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a